Today, we're diving into a really fascinating case where two countries basically asked the world's highest court to settle an argument over a seemingly empty patch of ocean. And it all came down to one single massive question. I mean, think about it. Out there, you don't have any landmarks, you can't build a fence, it's just water. So when two countries have claims that overlap, how on earth do you decide where one nation's rights end and the other's begin? Well, in 1993, that's the exact puzzle that Denmark and Norway handed over to the International Court of Justice. And this isn't just some dry legal case. It's a real story about geography, about incredibly valuable resources, and about this very tricky search for what's fair out on the high seas. All right, so to really get what this dispute is all about, we first need to meet the players and figure out what exactly was at stake in this huge stretch of water. So on one side, you've got Denmark, and they're there on behalf of Greenland, a gigantic continent-sized island with a massive coastline. And on the other side, you've got Norway, representing Jan Mayen, which is this tiny, remote, volcanic island with hardly anyone on it. It's a classic David and Goliath situation, at least when you're talking about sheer landmass. Okay, so we've met our players. What were they actually arguing about? Let's take a look at their opening claims, which you'll see started from two totally different places on the map. Denmark's argument was pretty straightforward. They wanted a boundary set 200 nautical miles off of Greenland's coast. That's the maximum exclusive economic zone you can claim under international law. Norway, though, came in and said, nope, let's keep it simple. We want a median line. Basically a line drawn smack dab in the middle, halfway between Greenland and Jan Mayen. As you can imagine, this created a huge zone of overlapping claims right there in the Norwegian Sea. And this wasn't just empty ocean, not at all. This was a critical fishing ground, especially for a fish called capelin. So yeah, the stakes here were incredibly high. Now, before the International Court of Justice could even think about drawing a new line, it had to do its homework. And the first thing it had to check was a really important claim from Norway. Was this problem already solved? See, Norway's whole argument was basically, hey, hold on, we've already figured this out. They argued that past agreements between the two of them had already set the median line as the default principle for any future sea borders they might draw. So the court put on its detective hat and started looking at the evidence. First up, a 1965 agreement. But the court's finding? Nope. That treaty was very specific. It was about the North Sea and another area called the Skagerrak. It never once mentioned Greenland or Jan Mayen. Okay, so next, Norway points to the 1958 Geneva Convention. The court agreed, yeah, it does recommend a median line, but, and this is a huge but, it has this little escape clause for special circumstances that might make a median line totally unfair. So the court's conclusion was crystal clear. No. There is no boundary already in place. Those old agreements just don't apply here. And that meant the judges had to basically roll up their sleeves and figure out a new boundary from square one, which would end up being a pretty big deal for international law. And this is where the case gets really fascinating. With no existing line to go on, the court had to start its hunt for those special circumstances that the 1958 convention mentioned. So, what in the world are special circumstances? Well, in maritime law, they're basically any relevant factors, could be geography, the environment, whatever, that would make a simple geometric line inequitable. The whole point of this process, the court's main goal, is to get to what they call an equitable result, which is just a fancy way of saying a fair and just outcome for everybody. So the first and honestly the most powerful piece of evidence that Denmark put on the table was the geography itself. It was a question of scale that you just couldn't ignore. I mean, just look at the numbers here. The relevant coastline for Greenland was about 524 kilometers. And for tiny Jan Mayen, just 58 kilometers. That is a massive difference, about 9-1. The court looked at that and said, yeah, that's a major special circumstance. It just didn't seem fair to give equal sea space to such wildly unequal coastlines. All right, the next clue had to do with resources, specifically those capelin fish. The court studied their migration patterns and realized that a strict median line would give pretty much the entire main fishing area to Norway. So, to make sure both countries had fair access, the court ruled that this was also a relevant circumstance that meant the line had to be moved. Now, the court did look at a few other potential clues, but they all turned out to be dead ends. Denmark tried to argue that Greenland's population of 55,000 should matter more than the handful of people on Jan Mayen, but the court said nope, socioeconomic factors don't get to decide permanent sea borders. Security concerns also ruled irrelevant. What the countries did in the past didn't apply to this specific case. So the court had its two key pieces of evidence, that huge coastal disparity and the need for both countries to get to the fish. Now came the hard part, connecting those dots and actually drawing the final line. And the solution the court came up with was actually pretty slick. It was this cool hybrid model. First, they chopped the whole disputed area into 3 zones. For the southern zone, where the main fishing happened, they just split it right down the middle, equal access for all. But for the other 2 zones, they drew a line that gave more weight and more area to Greenland to account for that 9-to-1 coastal difference. It was a totally custom solution designed to be fair. So the line was drawn, the math was done, and the court delivered its final judgment. But as you might have guessed, the decision wasn't exactly unanimous. The final vote was pretty overwhelming. 14 judges voted for the court's proposed line, and only 1 voted against it. That's a huge endorsement of this really carefully built solution. But that one lone dissenter, Judge Fisher, he made a really powerful point. He argued that the court just didn't go far enough. He basically said, look, the coast ratio is 9-to-1 for Greenland, but the final sea area we gave them is only about 3-to-1. How is that truly equitable? For him, even the court's carefully adjusted line just didn't quite get there. And that really leaves us with the big, profound question at the heart of this entire case. When we draw lines on a map, when we're carving up the shared resources of our planet, what does fairness truly look like? Is it just simple math and geometry? Or is it a much more complex balancing act of geography, resources, and history? This case doesn't give us any easy answers, but it sure gives us a fascinating blueprint for how we try to find them.